Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, as always, John Barker, representative for our district. And John, thank you. Thank you for being here today.
It's Friday, Doug.
Yep, it's Friday, and John comes in every Friday, and he brings in a special guest. And today he's brought in Blaine Finch from Ottawa.
Doug, great to be here with you.
Nice to have you here, and I know you're an attorney, and you're working, you're a pro tem.
Yep, Speaker Pro Tem for the Kansas House.
All right. We're going to get some updates. We're going to jump right in and see, because every week I keep getting newspaper articles about what's going on, and the premise of this show is John Barker comes in, brings in a guest, and we find out the reality of what's going on as opposed to press releases and different interpretations. So John, tell me, what's happened this week in the legislature?
Oh, Doug, it's week 6. We've just completed legislature is moving along very smoothly at this point. Our committees are hearing bills. Monday is the last day that non-exempt committees can kick out bills to the floor of the House. Those that are already out that are not from non-exempt will die at some point in time. And then when we come back, as I mentioned last week, we're going to be off about 4 days without pay, folks. So that all the Senate bills will come to the House, and the House bills will be transferred over to the Senate, and then those committees will be working Senate bills. Of course, being a chair of a non-exempt committee, I can still work House bills or Senate bills. We've done a few things, but mostly this week we've been on the floor a few days. We were on the floor passing bills on Wednesday. Thursday they did final action, then they did committee of the whole. Passed a few interesting bills. Of course, one of the big bills was the Capers bill, Senate Bill 9, which has to do that back in 2016, we did not pay all the money we should have paid into Capers. Revenues are up. This was a priority for us. We did pass it. We went to final action today. So that bill will be out of the way. Senate Bill 22, since I'm on tax, is a bill we're probably going to work next week, I understand. And it has to do with what's called the windfall tax from the federal government. Of course, made their tax cuts last year. Normally, the state of Kansas just adopts whatever the federal government does. In this case, because of the exemptions and the lack of itemization, we would actually raise people's taxes if we do not take an action. So we want to fix it so that no one will pay more taxes than they paid last year based upon this windfall tax. There's a couple of other bills that may be included in that. One of them is the internet sales tax. We collect about 90% of it. That's what post audit tells us. But this could add an additional revenue. It's not raising taxes, it's collecting from everybody who should be paying sales taxes, in my belief. And it could bring in another $40 to $70 million, so that may be part of that tax package, along with maybe a cut in sales taxes on food. Not exactly what that will look like yet. We've still got to work the bill, but it is, you know, we're doing some good work. We're staying busy. Eventually, we'll probably, this week, we're going to be on the floor 3 days. Blaine being the Speaker Pro Tem. There's only 2 constitutional positions in our Constitution. One of them is the Speaker, and one of them is the Speaker Pro Tem. He's a heartbeat away from being Speaker, so to speak. He's also the Rules Chair, and he'll probably talk about the rules, and as I have in the past. But basically, Doug, you know, next week we'll be on the floor most of these, other than Monday. Then on Friday we will leave, come back the following Wednesday, and then start, committees will work Senate bills, also be working some House bills, and hopefully in a few weeks after that we'll take a break, come back for the veto session, and all of us go home. You know, the most dangerous time is when the legislature is in session.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I've heard that, not from the representatives, however, but I have heard that.
Right.
This bill that you mentioned at the very beginning of this, is this the one that passed unanimously?
The Senate Bill 9 passed, was final action this morning. It was unanimous. Some of my colleagues from the other side voiced some concerns about it. but it was a bipartisan bill. I think it was 122,
117, I think is what we had today. Yeah, 117 to 0.
Everybody else was excused absence, but yeah. So
That's
I
pretty
don't think they
unusual,
liked
isn't it?
voting for it,
Yeah.
but they voted for it.
I got you. I got you. Well, and this was one that would be really a dollar savings for the people of the state, wouldn't it?
It will. It's costing like $25,000 a day for interest on that, because you know you've got to put the money in or make a loan on the capers. You can't just ignore it. So in 16 we paid less, but it was a loan, and that loan's a high interest loan. It's 7.75%. So it was costing us $25,000 a day. So we have the revenue now, and that's where we wanted to spend, pay our debt. We wanted to pay that back, and that will help the unfunded actuarial, which is the unfunded portion of capers. So I think it was a win-win. I'm just glad revenues were up enough that we could afford to do that.
Okay. We're going to cut away, take a break. When we come back, we're going to visit with Blaine and to see what else is going on in the legislature. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, as always, John Barker. And John's also brought in with us today Blaine Finch from Ottawa. And you are Speaker Pro Tem.
That's right, Speaker Pro Tem.
What's that mean?
Well, that's a great question. What does the Speaker Pro Tem do? The primary duty, and as Mr. Chairman said earlier, the primary duty is that you are the Speaker when the Speaker is unavailable or doesn't want to preside over the body for the day. Then the Speaker Pro Tem does that. I joke around that my real duty is to make sure he stays healthy. So we always try to make sure he's drinking enough water and getting enough rest and taking care of himself, so that I don't have to do too much. But in addition to that, it's a position that's kind of the one defined duty. There are some undefined duties that we take on, including helping all of our members when they have a constituent issue, somebody has a problem with the Department of Labor or Department of Revenue, getting them to the right person so we can help them get answers for their constituents and get problems solved. You know, every 2 years we get some new folks in who aren't used to dealing with that process, and so we try to guide them through and help them to do that. We help with communications. You know, you alluded to this in the introduction today on the show, that a lot of times there are what the media reports about or what people might hear about, and then there's kind of what the legislative perspective is about what really went on. And so we try to help make sure that our members have all of the facts at their disposal when they go home, so that they can inform people about what they're doing, what's going on under the dome, and making sure that we're spreading the right information to people about what's going on there.
Okay. Now, of course, you are in your 4th term, and you're an attorney in Ottawa, and you've been involved in politics at the local level for quite a while as well.
Yeah, so about 20 years ago, I got the bug when I was still in high school and said, I think I can do that, and ran for the Ottawa City Commission and ended up winning a seat on the commission.
How old were you then?
I was 19 when I ran, and I was 20 when I became mayor. In Ottawa, so
that was kind of a surprise to him, wasn't it?
It was a little shocking, you know, even to my parents. I remember my dad saying, "Well, son, I would support you no matter what," but I was a little surprised when that happened.
Your dad said, "I thought well, maybe you'd have 4 or 5 votes from family and a couple of friends."
We've got you, but come on, what are the odds that a 19-year-old kid's going to win? But we worked hard and you know, kind of learned the ropes of campaigning there, and that's obviously borne out some fruit later on as time has gone by and running legislative races. You know, the notion of retail politics and campaigning is really kind of the same, Doug, everywhere you go. It's just getting out and talking to people, finding out what's on their minds, and seeing how you can find ways to help them.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, how do you get all that done with a law practice too? I can hardly keep up with what I've got going.
Well, you've got this wonderful museum, and you've got the shows that you do, and you've got your law practice too, and so you can understand how all of that can happen. But it is a lot. I have a great staff. As you know, you can't run a law office without a great staff.
Absolutely.
I have wonderful people that work for me. I'm very fortunate and blessed to have them. And then it's really just about making sure you're efficient with your time, and you know, when you're at work, be at work and be mindful and do the things you got to do, and then you got to switch gears and go home and practice law and do that stuff. But it's a challenge, but it keeps me busy.
So what do you find is the toughest part about the position you're in now? What does people come up to you, that representatives, I know you're at the 59th district, but people come up and say, hey, can you make this happen? Can you do this? You get a lot of that?
Oh yeah, and I think you've known the chairman here a long time, and that's what happens. I think when you're there and people get to know you, and they say, okay, that's a person that knows how to get some things done, and I would guess he's got a lot of people knocking on his door and coming into his office and saying, hey John, can you help me with this or that? And I tease that the pro tem is Latin for human resources, because I went from being really involved in public policy making to now being a lot more involved in the personal side of it, and really the personnel side of it, and being much more in tune to helping members of our caucus and members of our chamber to be effective legislators, to be effective communicators, and to help them do the job better.
Do you get most of the legislators coming to you and say, I've got a individual in my community that's asking about this, don't have enough hours in the day to go by? You get a lot of that?
You get a lot of that.
Fires?
You get, oh my goodness, yes. And from your practice, you come in thinking in the morning you're going to do A, B, and C on your to-do list, and at 5:30, 6 o'clock, you're looking at the list, and none of that's been done, but you've been busy all day with other things. But yeah, certainly there's people have those questions. How do I get my bill heard? How do I talk to the chairman about this? How do I deal with this amendment that's coming on? How do we make something happen? So there's all kinds of questions from people, and you do spend a lot of your time just advising and trying to help them.
And Doug, he's also the rules chair, so he has to go up and make rulings when certain issues are raised. And that's probably the worst job I ever had in the legislature, but it is a pressure job.
It is.
It is a pressure job.
I remember when I first became rules chair, and Judge Barker looked at me and he said, "That's it. That's the last day you're ever going to have an easy day on the floor of the Kansas House, because anytime we're debating and somebody offers an amendment and there's a question of whether it's germane, that's our term of art. Does it connect to the subject matter of the bill? If that gets challenged, we have to go back behind the chair and we hold a little informal committee meeting and get some input. But ultimately, in the House, the decision is all on the rules chairman.
It is.
Do you rule that it's germane or not germane? And the judge had 25 years of experience making those calls on the bench, and I got thrown in and had to start making those calls. But he's been a great source of wisdom and guidance to help us through.
But it's one job that when you go on the floor of the House, normally I can do other things. I can answer emails or I can be writing letters. As the rules chair, you actually sit and listen to all the debate, because you never know when they're going to raise the issue and ask for the rules chair to go up front and make a ruling. And you only they don't really push you, but normally you need to make a decision because everybody's sitting waiting. For, 10
everything
minutes
grinds to a halt.
Everything grinds to a halt, and 10 minutes is a long time for people to be waiting.
I bet.
So you're under the gun, and he does a great job.
That's like being the judge up there and objection in a hotly contested case, and so you
Exactly.
got to be listening all the time. Hope you're listening. You're watching Legislative Updates. We'll be back right after these messages. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, and as you're looking at your screen, on your left is John Barker, and in the middle is Blaine Finch, and he's from the 59th out of Ottawa. And so while we were away from break, we were talking a little bit about some of the things that are coming up, and I understand you have a lot of insight in regards to the school finance, because this is something that's been going on for years and years, and I think that, as I understand it, the Supreme Court will be making some sort of a ruling yet this spring.
Well, and to your first point, yes, we've been involved in some sort of school finance litigation for decades in the state of Kansas, and not just the present case, which has been going on since 2010. So we're now in the 9th year of the what's known as the Gannon case, which is the present school funding case. It's had 6 different opinions from the Kansas Supreme Court come down, and the most recent one came out late last year talking about inflation. So the question that the court put back in the legislature's lap is, now you have to adjust all the money that you're adding to education. You have to adjust that for inflation. And they didn't really give a number, but they said it has to be some number that's added to this money that you've already put in, and that's on top of a lot of money.
Yeah, that's always one that John always brings up about how do you, and others who come in, is how do you hit a target when you don't know exactly what the number you're looking for?
I think the court was sensitive to the previous case, the Montoy case that was supposed to be wrapped up in 2007, 2008, they did give a specific number, and there was a lot of criticism of the court essentially taking over the appropriations authority from the legislature and setting a number. And so in Gannon, they've never really set a number, but that's also made it very difficult for the legislature to divine exactly what the court's intention was regarding that. So there's a obviously tension built into our system, right? That's what the founders intended, that you'd have tension between the different branches. But this one's a little different because you're talking about something that is specifically traditionally been a legislative function. How much money do you spend on something has traditionally been a question for the legislature to decide, and I think this is the one that's led to frustration as the court has kind of stepped in and said, no, legislature, you've got to spend more, and almost like that game kids play where you're cooler, warmer, hot, that's kind of the guidance we tend to get in these opinions without any real specifics.
Well, Blaine, I heard on the news, and so I don't know if it's accurate, but I heard that there was a bill that was going to be submitted for every classroom teacher to get $500. And is there such a bill that's working its way through?
We've heard discussion of that. There's been a lot of conversations about how you put the money in. What we come back to time and again here, as the court has been making their decisions, is they want money in base aid per pupil. And that's money that gives districts have more flexibility with that money to spend it how they see fit. What we know is that when they're given more money, districts tend to spend it on salaries and personnel, which for any business is the biggest line item. But you have some legislators who say, well, let's direct that money. Let's say where it has to go. And every time that's been tried, we've seen the court come back and tell the legislature, no, you have to put it into base. You can't really direct where it goes.
But the reason that's occurring is because teachers are coming in
Yes.
and saying, I can't buy any supplies. When I go to the superintendent or their principal, they say we have no funds. And so art teachers particularly, or shop teachers, they say we need material. We just can't have the kids come and sit. We actually do things with paints. And a lot of teachers are complaining that we don't have any money for the classroom. And at one point in time in Kansas, we had a law that said a percentage of it, the money that we allocated, goes to the classroom. And we've got away from that. It's a balancing act. What's the appropriate amount to go into the classroom? What's the appropriate amount for administration? And it keeps getting fuzzy lines. And you know that, Blaine.
Yeah, I mean the big thing is, look, I don't think anybody disagrees that public education is a huge priority in Kansas, always has been, and should be.
Right.
Right. More than half our budget goes to K through 12 education for our young people because Kansans value that, and our teachers and administrators work hard every day to try to educate our kids. Where we have a dispute, I think, is who should ultimately get to make the final decision on how much is enough. Is that something the legislature should be doing under Article 2 of our state constitution, where the legislature has the power of the purse, or is that something the court should step in under Article 6 and as they have done in this case and others, and tell the legislature what to do? And really the court coming to that conclusion is a relatively new phenomenon. Back in the 1990s, we had cases, and before that, where the courts said, we're not getting involved in that. The amount of money to be spent is a political question that should be up to the legislature. And since that, in the last two cases, Montoy and Gannon, we've had the court kind of reverse course a little bit and say, no, we will get involved in that, and we will weigh in on how much should be spent.
Right. And there was a 1972 Supreme Court decision out of San Antonio, Texas, where they had filed suit in the United States Supreme Court. I can't think of the justice who wrote the opinion, said, this is not an area the court should get into. It is for the local legislators who are answerable to the people. That's the decision for them to make. Now, that was a United States Supreme Court.
Yeah. And that would seem logical to me, and I suppose the same logic applies as I listen to the story about the $500 per classroom teacher. So, well, I understand that. I know lots of teachers, and they do spend money out of their own pocket. But when I first heard it, I thought, well, gosh, that seems like that would be something the districts would do for their teachers, as opposed to the legislature doing it for that. It would just seem like that would be money that's already available for the school districts.
Right, right. And as you know, the judge said, the goal is to get money into the classroom where it does the most good for kids. And we've added a lot of money. There's still another $500 million to come over the next 4 years into K-12 education. By the time we're done, we'll be spending in total, if you count all 6 of the factors of school funding, we'll be spending over $4 billion, almost $5 billion on public education in the state of Kansas, which is a huge portion of our budget. and it shows the value that we place on education. But this last bit, this inflation piece, could be as much as $90 million a year, up to $360 million a year in year 4, and that's more than our corrections budget, our DCF budget, and would go a long way on highways and broadband in rural areas and some of the other things that our states need.
Yeah. We're going to cut away and take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. And first off, John, thank you so much. Thank you for taking time on Friday afternoons after spending the week, and I know how many hours you put in Topeka, a lot, and taking the time to come in and give legislative updates. So thank you so much for doing
Doug,
that.
I enjoy doing it, and I get a lot of comments, as I mentioned earlier, when I go to West IGA or go to Marion County or Hope or down in Navarre where I farm. People always come up at the co-op and say, saw you on TV, and that was very helpful.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, thanks.
Blaine, thank you so much for coming in. John always brings
Thank
an
you.
exciting guest that's informative, and you have fit that to the T. Thank
Oh.
you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Hope you've enjoyed Legislative Updates. See you next time. Hope you have enjoyed this segment of Legislative Updates with John Barker. I'm Doug Thompson with special guest John Barker. Tune in next time for another Legislative Update. Thanks for watching.